I'm sorry, but you got to give me a minute to deal with Casey's song right there. So just... Can't just kind of go, okay. And I'm also sorry because this is going to take a while. So smoke them if you got them. Take a nap early. I got a lot to share with you today, and I shouldn't apologize to you. I should apologize to the child care workers because they're going to be going, where is everybody? But rather than edit it down, I decided to give you the whole truckload, so I'm sorry about that. And I'm sorry for what I'm about to ask you to do. Well, I'm not really sorry because I kind of enjoy making you do stuff. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is I'm going to ask you to say 4 words. And I want to see if you can say them and get them right. But the hard part about these 4 words is I want you to say them to someone. So maybe we can bring out the house lights a little bit. And I want you to catch eyes with somebody next to you. I realize if you're sitting next to your spouse, you're maybe going, I don't want to look at them in church. That's scary. Or, maybe a stranger. And I realize we're a church with a whole bunch of personal space issues. So there's some of you, like I see you, so I got eyes on you up there. But I want you to find somebody to look at, okay? I want you to look at them when you say these 4 words. It could be a stranger, it could be a friend, just get your eyes on somebody. And I'm going to say a word, and I want you to repeat it. We're going to say 4 words together. Everybody okay with that? So you got eyes on somebody? All right, everybody? You're going to repeat after me. You ready? Yes, I am sorry. How'd that feel? Awkward? Uncomfortable? Let's try it one more time, just all together. Yes, I am sorry. Ready? Yes, I am sorry. What is it with sorry? What is it with apology? Why are we so confused about it? Because it's a powerful thing. I mean, we're confused about it, I think, because we use an apology as a placeholder. I mean, a drama diffuser. We use I'm sorry when we kind of don't know what else to say. We say, I'm sorry. But I don't really mean it. We say it thoughtlessly and carelessly, but I think we all know that there's power there. There's power in an apology. There's power, especially in a sincere apology. I understood this when I was a little kid. When I was a young kid, I realized that saying I'm sorry was like a get-out-of-jail-free card. So I could misbehave, I could pull my sister's hair, I could tease my brother, I could even yell at my parents. And they would say, David, you need to go to your room. And I would just say, sorry. And they would go, well, we'll give you another chance. But eventually my mom caught on. She figured out that I was manipulating this whole apology thing. And one time I had hit my sister or something, and she said, you go to bed without dinner. And I went, but Mom, I'm sorry. And she says, no. You can't say you're sorry unless you mean it. You have to mean it if you say it. Do you understand? You can't just say you're sorry and make things go away. You have to mean it. And I stood there and I said, I'm sorry. And she said, stop it. But I think we understand. See, we understand that we are marooned on a mutinous planet, all 7 billion plus of us. And the only way that we exist, the only way that we can occupy this terra firma together is by the establishment of some social contracts, some expectations of consideration and human relationships. And those are largely unspoken. They're expectations, they're implications that kind of guide our interactions on this planet together. It's like an agreement that we won't murder each other or take each other's stuff. And as long as we kind of agree to these social contracts, the relational fabric of the world that we live in remains intact. And that works its way down to communities and to families and to individuals. But we all know that social contract gets violated, that fabric gets torn. And the power of a sincere apology is the mechanism, that is the remedy. It is powerful enough to repair the damaged fabric of the social world that we live in. It's powerful enough to actually remedy the violation of the social contracts, both the explicit and the implicit contracts. There is power in I am sorry. A couple weeks ago, we began a conversation about the power of yes. In fact, I invited you to make 2019, join me in making 2019 the year of yes. And we've been talking about the challenges of yes and the power of yes. And today I want to talk about when yes means I'm sorry. And how do we mean yes, I am sorry. I want to make things right. I want to talk about some lessons, some difficult lessons about the character of a sincere apology. And I apologize that it's going to take me a while to get through all this stuff, but I don't apologize for doing it. So maybe we should pray before we go any further. Would you do that with me? Father in heaven, I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing in your sight, that you would use your words spoken by your servant, anointed by your Spirit, to challenge us to be people who champion the repair of the fabric, the restoration of the cultural order, and that we would be willing to champion the character of sincere apologies. Pray that for myself and for my family and for all of us here. For I ask that in Jesus' name. Amen. The story I want to share with you is a story that many of you probably know something about. It is the story of David and Bathsheba. David was the hero of Israel. He was chosen to be their king when he was just a young boy. For 20 years he waited to ascend to the throne, and when he did, it turned out that David was exactly the right man for the job. He was identified as a man after God's own heart. He was a brilliant military leader and a political strategist, and he was a godly spiritual leader for the nation. In fact, the theocratic nation of Israel reached its apex, its high water mark in history under David's reign. But David entered into a very dark season, and the darkness falls on David's life in 2 chapters of a book written by the prophet Samuel. We have it recorded for us in the Hebrew Bible in 2 Samuel chapter 11 and chapter 12. 2 Samuel chapter 11 begins with sort of a foreboding sentence. It tells us that in the spring of the year, when kings normally go off to war, David stayed home. He sent Joab and the armies of Judah to fight the Ammonites. See, David had been in combat for 20 years. He had spent 20 years on the battlefield year after year. He fought the Ammonites and the Amalekites and the Canaanites and the Termites and the Satellites and the I wish I mites and all the ites all over the place. And David deserved a break. He deserved a time off. And in the spring of the year, basically that's when the king would send out his army to collect the taxes. And the way that they would enforce their law on the city-states that they ruled over is they would lay siege to those city-states. As the army of Judah would approach the Ammonite city, the fortress where the Ammonites resided, all of the farmers and the villagers in the outlying towns would hear of the army coming, and they would flee into the city, and they would lock the city gates, and they would lock themselves safely in the fortress. Well, it was tactically a military mistake to attack a fortress, so the army would basically surround it and camp out, and they would wait. And they would say, I bet we can wait longer than you can, because you're going to run out of food and water eventually, and when you need food and water, you're going to come out and surrender to us and give us what we're asking for. So basically, it was a very macho camping trip for the army of Judah, and David said, I have been there and done that. I don't need to go on that anymore. You guys go, get the tribute from the Ammonites, and bring it back here, and I'll lay low, I'll hide out in the castle. This was a chill time for David. This was a vacation, the first real vacation he had in 20 years. And we read in the next verse that this was so chill, he was waking up from his afternoon nap. He was chilling in the palace, and he goes out onto the parapets on the top of the palace, and he's overlooking his city of Jerusalem, and there he sees, taking a bath on a rooftop in the city buildings beneath the castle, beneath the palace, a woman of unusual beauty, taking a bath. Not sure if you're familiar with basic bathing practices, but it is not a moment of modesty. And David immediately notices her. And so he sends word down to his palace staff. He says, I need somebody to go find out who that is, because I need to know. And they go out and they find out that this woman's name is Bathsheba. And she is the daughter of a person that David knows. His name is Eliam. And she is married to one of his Gibborim, a man named Uriah. You see, David, when he was forming his army almost 20 years earlier, had assembled the finest fighters he could find, and he hand-selected a group of 37 special forces warriors. They were called the Gibborim, David's mighty men, and one of them was a man named Uriah from the region of the Hittites. And Uriah was not just one of David's 37 men, he was Uriah the Hittites, and the Hittites were known as a ferocious warrior people. So Uriah was David's chosen commander, his special forces leader, and Bathsheba was his wife. David finds this out, and he says, bring her to me. And he brings her into the palace, and he brings her into his bed, and he has sex with her. Now, it was the custom in that time. There was a program where the king would have the prerogative to provide unmarried single women, widows, because the population of women in Palestine at that time was probably 3 or 4 to 1, women to men. And a woman without a family to care for her, or without a provider in a husband, would likely have a life of destitution or prostitution. And so it was the king's prerogative to identify, let's just say, the more desirable of those widows and of those unmarried or women without children or husbands, and bring them into his palace and allow them to live under the umbrella of his care. Now, make no mistake, there were fringe benefits. And so Bathsheba could easily have come in as one of those women, except she was married. She was married to a man he knew. She was the daughter of a man he knew, and that was adultery. Well, David probably figured nobody will know. Nobody's going to find out about this. We get no indication that it was an ongoing thing. It was a one-night stand, perhaps, but then Bathsheba sends word to the palace, perhaps a number of weeks or months later, and tells him that she is pregnant. Uriah has been out with the armies of Joab surrounding the Ammonite fortress, and his wife turns up pregnant. David was kind of in a jam. See, David wasn't just the cultural curator and the political leader and the military general of the armies of Judah. He was their spiritual leader. And he had committed adultery. He had violated the law. He was sworn to obey and to champion. But he had a plan. He had a brilliant plan. And he sends message to his battlefield commander, Joab. He says, you know what, I think Uriah the Hittite, man, he's probably exhausted. He should come home for a little R&R. And so Joab sends Uriah back to Jerusalem, and David sees him and says, man, you should go home and relax. I've heard your wife is hot. And you should go and hang out with her and enjoy some time away. Because David had a plan. And the plan was that Uriah was going to come home. He was going to sleep with his wife. He was going to go back to the battlefield. And they weren't particularly good at just say the biological math. And maybe 6 months later, she has a kid, even though the kid doesn't look anything like Uriah. He's the dad because he was home and there was the thing. And that thing happened and there's the kid. And David figures, I'm off the hook. But Uriah doesn't go home. Uriah stays in the palace and sleeps in the barracks with the palace guard. And word of that comes to David the next day, and he brings Uriah and he's like, hey, fella, what is wrong with you? You got like battle fatigue or something? Why didn't you go home? And he says, how can I do that? How can I go and have the comfort of my wife when my peers, my soldiers, my men are out on the battlefield, when they are in the shadow of the Ammonite fortress, when they are vulnerable and the ark is there and the personality of the nation is there? He says, I swear I would never be that kind of guy. So David goes to plan B. And plan B involves alcohol. And so he decides that he's going to get Uriah drunk and figures, well, I get him drunk, he's going to kick in the instincts and go home. But he doesn't. Second time, he sleeps in the barracks with the palace guard, and David's pretty jammed up now. So he says, okay. And then his plan grows dark. And he writes a note to his battlefield commander, Joab, and he says, I want you to press the battle against the Ammonites. And this was militarily a stupid plan. That's not how you laid siege to a building. That's the way you get a whole lot of guys killed and you don't make any progress. When they're up in the defensive position and they have the advantage and you press in with your little swords and your little shields and your bows and arrows and they're shooting down at you, making you dead. You just don't do it. But David says, I want you to press into the battle. I want you to press in toward the fortress, and I want Uriah the Hittite to lead the charge. And he wrote the note and he placed it in Uriah's hand and sent him to his death. Joab obeyed his generals, his king's command, and they attacked, and a number of soldiers were killed along with Uriah the Hittite. Word came back to Jerusalem that Uriah had died in combat, and Bathsheba went into mourning. When the period of mourning was over, she was, as many other widows had been, brought into the palace as one of David's wives. And lo and behold, she gave birth to a son. And no one was the wiser. David had nothing to apologize for because he had gotten away with it. There was nothing that was going to impact his status as the spiritual leader of the nation. Except there was a prophet named Nathan who knew. And Nathan comes to David in 2 Samuel chapter 12, and he says, "Oh, great king, I need to tell you a story." It's a story of a village, and in that village there were two men. One of them was very wealthy. He had many flocks and herds and cattle and sheep and goats. And there was another man in that same village, but he was very poor. And he only had one small lamb. But he loved that lamb. He raised that lamb as if it were one of his own family. That lamb ate from the plate on his table and drank from his cup. Not the most sanitary of conditions, but he loved that little lamb. He cuddled it like it was his own little daughter. And Nathan says to David, so one day this rich man had a guest come into the village. And he wanted to prepare an appropriate feast for him. But rather than taking an animal from his herds and flocks, he took that one lamb and he killed it and he prepared it as a gift, as a meal for his guest. David was furious. And he said, I swear to God that that man deserves to die. At the very least, he has to repay that man fourfold and be shown no pity. I like to imagine that this was one of the greatest pregnant pauses in biblical literature, as Nathan drew back and looked at his king and said, "You are that man. You have murdered Uriah with the sword of the Amorites, and you have stolen his wife. What you have done, God has despised." And in that moment, David comes face to face with his disobedience and apologizes. And he says, "Yes, I am sorry." And Nathan tells him, "God accepts your apology. You will not die. But you have set into motion a course of events that cannot be stopped. And the child that Uriah's wife is carrying will pay the price." In this story, there are four main characters, and each of them reveals a lesson about the power and the challenge of a sincere apology. Two of them are easy lessons that most of us will say, "Okay, I understand that." The other two are very complicated and difficult. And the first one is the lesson of Nathan. When we are in a position where we have to be the one who asks for, or who directs, or who demands an apology. When we have to be the one who initiates it, we have to remember that an apology is an exercise in self-discovery. An apology is an exercise in self-awareness. We can say a sincere apology requires that we know why. That we know why. This was Nathan's tactic. Nathan didn't burst in on David and go, "I know what you did. I know what you did, you bag of dirt. You did these things to Uriah, and you did this to Bathsheba, and you are guilty. And God knows it, and I know it." He didn't do that. He said, "No, I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm going to let you discover for yourself why you need to be sorry." See, that's the key. The key to it is that the confrontation that provokes an apology is not to create humiliation. Its goal is restoration. The goal of that confrontation is not to humiliate another person, not to get payback, but to seek restoration. And if we seek restoration, we want someone to know why they hurt us and why they need to apologize. Because just saying you're sorry is not enough. You have to understand why it's important. If you're a parent here today, this is an important thing to guide your children in. Now you may say, "Well, that's a bunch of pop psychology mumbo jumbo, that it's exercise in self-awareness and self-discovery." No, it's an exercise in understanding the power in a sincere apology, and the power and the responsibility that we have to maintain the social fabric of the world that we live in, to teach our children how, when that gets torn, that there is a mechanism for repairing it. And you have to understand why that's important. I simplified that process with my kids. I tried never to say to them, "Because I said so." I tried always to explain why. This is why you need to talk to your sister. This is why you need to apologize to your friend. This is why you need to say you're sorry to your mother. Or this is why I'm saying I'm sorry to you. And I realize in the pace of life, it's difficult to invest that kind of time, but we need to teach our children the power of a sincere apology and understand why we need to be the ones who accept the responsibility for that. Nathan teaches us that tactically with the way that he introduces to David his own fault and allows David to see himself in the mirror, to see himself in that man. The second lesson is another easier lesson. It's the lesson of Uriah. Because if there is a person in this story who is completely blameless, it's Uriah. Uriah does nothing wrong, and he dies. Uriah comes home, and rather than compromise his honor, rather than compromise his integrity, he comes to the palace and he basically says, I won't go sleep with my wife. I'm going to stay with the palace guard in the barracks. And the lesson of Uriah is a lesson about a life of integrity. Because if we live a life with integrity, we never have to apologize. If we live living a life of integrity means never having to say you're sorry for living that life. Now that doesn't mean if you are seeking to live a life of purity, seeking to live a life of integrity, that you don't apologize. No, we do. We apologize when we get it wrong. We apologize when we need to diffuse the drama. We apologize as anyone else does. But if we want to live as men and women of integrity, our life becomes our best defense. Because a life lived with integrity requires no apology. Have you ever been falsely accused? Anybody pointed you out and said, yeah, they did that, and you know you didn't? Have you ever been charged and considered guilty without the chance to prove your innocence? What do we normally do when we are falsely accused, when accusations are made against us, particularly where we are innocent? We bow up. We say, well, let me tell you why that's not true. Let me give you this list of defenses. Let me build a barrier. Let me dismantle your circumstantial evidence. Let me tell you why I am innocent. And many times that protest comes across as insecurity, as an indication not of innocence, but of guilt. It's like the quote from Queen Gertrude in Shakespeare's Hamlet, where she's watching an actress on stage, and she says, methinks she protesteth too much. We actually come across as guilty because we are trying to craft a defense, and our best defense is a life well lived. Our best defense is a life of integrity. This is who I am when no one is looking. This is who I am when the consequences don't matter. And you never need to apologize for choosing to live that life. It's what my mom called living according to clean underwear. I'm like, Mom, what do you mean I have to wear clean underwear? She goes, well, if you're in a car accident, you wind up in the hospital, you don't want the doctors to see your soiled shorts. And I'm saying, Mom, if I'm in a car accident, I'm probably going to soil my shorts in the accident. But basically what she was trying to say is, live a life of integrity, live a life that's clean, that's righteous, live a life when no one is looking, that you never have to apologize for. And then when you are accused, and then when people throw stones at you, your best defense is not what you say, but how you have lived. This is the lesson of Uriah. The lesson of Nathan is that an apology is an exercise in self-examination. It's a self-discovery and self-awareness. And when we are accused, that a life of integrity requires no apology. The third lesson is the lesson of Bathsheba, and this is where it gets messy. And for me to talk about the lesson of Bathsheba, I have to make you angry. I have to surface in you a frustration that I believe is supposed to be there. And the way I need to do that is I need to tell you that for hundreds of generations, the rabbinical interpretation of the story of David and Bathsheba blamed Bathsheba. This whole thing was her fault. Now, part of that was to protect the integrity of David, the man after God's own heart, to portray him as a victim of her feminine wiles. Because the rabbi said, how could she have possibly been bathing on the roof and not have expected to be noticed by the king? How could she possibly have not known what she was doing when she did that? And the rabbis constructed the argument that said that because she was so beautiful, she should have known better. It was her fault. And that when David saw her, and David ordered her into the palace and then ordered her into his bed, that she should have said, "No, I will protect the purity, the fealty of my commitment to my marriage bed, and I would rather die than violate that." That was her option. There should be something in you right now that says that's not right. That doesn't sound fair. How do we even know that she knew the king was going to be in the palace? Because for all she knew, for all the people in Jerusalem knew, he was on the battlefield with the army. That's where he was supposed to be. That's where his banner was. He was hiding out in the palace. The palace was supposed to be empty. Much less in the middle of the day, who's walking around just kind of killing time? Everybody has things to do. No one would ever see me. How do we know that she had any choice? Because when the king says, "This is what you should do," you do it or you die. At the very least, she knew that if she disobeyed the king's orders, that her husband's career would suffer mightily. She had no choice. She had nothing to apologize for. There is no indication anywhere in the Bible that Bathsheba had to or did apologize for anything. See, this is what makes it complicated. This is what makes it hard, because we want to assign blame. And that's what an apology does. An apology says, put the blame on me. I'll take responsibility for that. I am sorry. When we ask someone for an apology, we are asking them to fix blame on themselves. This is your fault. You need to apologize. And we are people who want to connect the dots, and we want to fix blame. And sometimes we are caught up in a chain of events that is not of our own making. And even though you could impute to us some kind of guilt, we were just the wrong people in the wrong place at the wrong time. And sometimes life is like that. And rather than being a people who are constantly saying somebody has to pay, somebody has to be blamed, maybe we can be a people of grace. And the lesson I take away from Bathsheba, and you can take this or leave this, is that love and grace accepts an apology and requires none. It accepts an apology without demanding one. It accepts an apology no matter how fragile, no matter how thoughtless, but it never requires it, it never expects it, it never demands it. This is what love and grace does. See, Bathsheba suffered. She suffered. She lost her husband. And regardless of whether or not you speculate about the relationship she had with a soldier, whether there was a lack of intimacy or abandonment issues, doesn't matter. This was someone she cared about, someone who was close to her, who was killed in combat. And that is a deep wound. And she lost a son. She lost a child. She had suffered. She had paid. We don't know the story. We don't know all of the issues in people's lives. And before we are quick to assign blame or to fix blame or to demand responsibility, or even before we accept it on ourselves, grant grace. Accept the apology that's given, but expect none. The fourth lesson is the lesson of David. And this should be an easy lesson because David is guilty. This whole thing was his fault. He is the chief actor. He is the author of all of these things. Those soldiers who died, Uriah who died, the child who died, that's all on him. He was the one who set this chain of events into motion when he saw Bathsheba and he said, it's not enough for me to appreciate her, I must have her. And it was his greed, and it was his lust, and it was his selfishness that sent everything into motion. He was clearly guilty. It tells us at the end of the events of David and Bathsheba's union and the death of Uriah that God was displeased with what David had done. Take it as a hint from a spiritual professional. God being displeased with you is bad. It's a bad thing. But he had displeased God. But David recognized that this was on him. And he accepted the responsibility for it, and he offered a sincere apology. In fact, he wrote it down. He wrote his apology down in the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Psalms. The 51st Psalm has a prescription. It was put there at some point by a scribe. We don't know whether it was inspired or uninspired, but it represents the time that they believe this was written. And the prescription to the 51st Psalm says, for the choir director, a psalm of David, regarding the time Nathan the prophet came to him after David had committed adultery with Bathsheba. This is what a sincere apology looks like. Have mercy on me, O God, because of your unfailing love. Because of your great compassion, blot out the stain of my sins. Wash me clean from my guilt. Purify me from my sin. For I recognize my rebellion. It haunts me day and night. And then he says this in verse 4. Against you and you alone have I sinned. I have done what is evil in your sight. You will be proved right in what you say, and your judgment against me is just. The lesson that I gained from David's yes, I am sorry, is that God will always accept a sincere apology. When others won't accept it from you, when you are guilty and you go and you beg for forgiveness and you apologize to the most sincere extent, there's no guarantee that other people will release you from that, or that they will forgive you, or they will accept your apology. God will always accept a sincere apology. His grace is greater than all of our sin. And David understood that that was the place that he had to go first with his apology. That his principal source of his sincere apology was directed to God. It was between him and God. I have to make this right. I have to repair the fabric of our relationship that I tore. But there's a problem. Nathan tells him that God accepts his apology. Nathan tells him that, yes, God has forgiven you and you will not die. But you have set into motion a course of events that will not bring Uriah back to life. It will not bring those other soldiers back to life. And the child that Uriah's wife is carrying will be a victim of that chain of events. And you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. And you can't undo that no matter how passionately you apologize. That sometimes there are consequences that no apology can make right. And while God will always accept and honor a sincere apology, sometimes there is no apology that can fix everything. There is no apology that can undo what has already been done, what has already been lost. Even the most sincere apology doesn't always fix everything. And the lesson of David is, do it anyway. The lesson of David is complicated because we can't explain why the consequences take place after he has apologized. It's difficult to sort out the blame and to see Bathsheba as an innocent bystander in a series of events that she participated in. And we don't always know how to do the math on that, but if we defer to grace and love, then we can accept an apology without demanding or expecting one. The lesson of Uriah is a little easier. If you want to defend yourself against false accusations, live a life that is above reproach. A life lived with purity, a life lived with righteousness, a life lived with integrity requires no apology. And the lesson of Nathan is the interesting, obvious thing that a sincere apology means knowing why, that an apology is an exercise in self-examination, self-discovery, self-awareness. I'm sorry that it's not more simple than that there aren't, 7 rules, that I can't give you a handout that says, when you are wrong or when you are wrong, here's 5 things to say, here's 6 things to do. It's just not that clean. Reweaving the fabric of the tear in our social construct is difficult. Repairing the breach is messy. And sometimes it never goes back the way that it was before. Sorry that it's not just this clean set of rules for true forgiveness. It's really finding our way through it, navigating it like human beings, marooned on a mutinous planet. But it's powerful stuff. And even though we struggle to get it right and we're afraid of it and we're uncertain how to do it, I think we know how powerful it can be. My daughter figured it out when she was a young child. I was in the habit of apologizing to my children when I lost my temper, or I said something I shouldn't have, or I forgot to do something I promised. I said, I'm sorry to my children thousands of times. In fact, I'm still apologizing to them. I always apologize to them for being pastor's kids. I'm sorry you had to be raised with me as your father. But one time, I remember very specifically, I had lost my temper with my oldest daughter. And I had gone to a meeting, and in that meeting, I just realized I need to go back and I need to apologize to her. So I left the meeting and I drove home, and I saw her, and I got down on my knee and I said, Kaya, honey, I'm sorry I lost my temper. And she looked at me and she said, okay, Dad, but I need to know, are you apologizing so that I'll feel better? Or are you apologizing so that you'll feel better? She was 8. She knew the power of an apology. Power of an apology to repair the breach in the social fabric, to redeem and to remedy the violation of the relational contract that we have with one another. That's the power of a sincere apology. I don't know about you, but I think we could use a little bit more of that in the public discourse that is going on in our world today. Somebody needs to forward to me the link of the video of the press conference where one of our national leaders stands up and goes, I blew it. Sorry. I'm sorry, I was a little arrogant. I was a jerk about it. I overreacted. I pressed when I should have given in. I apologize. Have you seen a press conference like that? Do you realize the power that would have? But I don't think we can expect the world that we live in to teach us how to sincerely apologize. It is on us to teach the world we live in how to do it. And I'm sorry that it's not easier, and I'm sorry that it's not clearer. But I'm not sorry that it's ours. And I'm not sorry that we get to model that with one another and for the world we live in. I look at you today and I say, yes, I'm not sorry about that.